back for them. They're all pretty. So have a seat, guys. And if you don't mind, I'm going to be playing on my phone while you talk. Just kidding, my notes are here. It is a mobile conference. I hope nobody's offended. So if you tell us really briefly, for anybody who doesn't know, what is Evernote?
Evernote is a service to help you be smarter, to help you remember things and use the things that you know more effectively.
Okay. How many users would you say you have worldwide?
Right. A little over 65 million users right now.
That's impressive. Well done to you.
Thank you.
What other factors do you consider when people ask you about scale? I mean, beyond just how many users do you have?
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that big numbers, like how many users you have, how much total bandwidth you use, like those are easy to quote, but when you're dealing with scale, it's really about the peaks. It's about the busiest minute of the entire week. And you figure that in a week, there's like 10,000 minutes, so the busiest minute of your week is only 0.01% of everything you have to deal with, but that's where the problems come in. It's the busiest time, and for us, that tends to be on Monday mornings, like 8 a.m., our operations team gets to wake up and start the week, off on a good note, because that's when overall in the entire world most people are using Evernote, and we have to plan for that 1 minute is to make that minute as smooth as possible. So everything that you can do to make your peaks smoother, either by just designing your application correctly, tuning what things you do, when. That's what scale's all about. So trying to make the spikes go away, or at least smooth them out as much as possible.
I know, I've talked to Twitter about the same thing. Like during the election, they had these huge spikes of tweets per minute, and between you guys and me, they told me they had to throw an awful lot of money at the problem just to deal with that.
Right.
So, do tell me, how long did it take you guys to get from 1 million users to 10 million to 65? What was that process like?
Well, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary of launching the public service. In startup years, that's more like 35. It's like dog years. It took us a year to go from 0 users to 1 million users. 2 years later, we were at 10 million users. And then on our 5th anniversary, we're over 50 million. So, a lot of the growth was in our second year is when things really started to take off.
And this is a mobile conference. What's your mobile to desktop breakdown?
Yeah, that's really interesting for us. I think we've got a bit of a different perspective than some companies because we have both mobile applications and desktop applications. 85% of all of our new users come in from mobile. So mobile is extremely important to us. It's a great acquisition channel, all the different app stores and markets and bundling on phones. Like, that's just fantastic. And over time, that's pretty consistent. So 89% of our users use us on a mobile phone in a given month. But over time, we get people to start using us in 2 different places. So 24% of all of our users use us on both mobile and on desktop. And that's extremely important to us because the monetization opportunities, the revenue we get off of people who start on mobile and then move eventually to desktop is just night and day. We did some complicated regression analysis recently to figure out, for people who start out on mobile, you have the same mobile experience, the same engagement from the same country, everything else. You isolate all the variables you can. The people who decide to start using us on a desktop platform are worth 20 times as much as the people who stay on mobile, controlling for everything else. So it's really, it's night and day for us. We obviously value mobile users. We think that there is a profitable business model off of mobile only. But for us, I hate to give away the secret to any competitors, but getting people to start using you on multiple platforms is the engagement is so much higher, and the willingness to pay it's night and day.
Do you think that's just a matter of time? What do you think the big difference is? Are people just not used to doing that stuff on mobile as well?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things that go on there. I think the expectations are lower. People just don't expect to pay as much on mobile, or if at all. And I think that how important something feels to your life, how engaged you are, how much you're using it at work, for example, really changes as you go from mobile only to mobile plus desktop, or at least mobile plus web. We've got 6,000 businesses that are using our business offering, and for them, like, mobile only just wouldn't be viable. So I think there's just a lot of revenue opportunities that you can't do do with just plain mobile, which isn't to say that you can't make a profitable mobile-only business, but for us, it's night and day. Only 20% of all of our revenue comes from people who are only on mobile. The other 80% comes from people who are using us in some other desktop fashion.
That's very interesting, and I'd be interested to know as well from Pandora in a moment what that breakdown would be like. So earlier, minutes ago really, you spoke about you could scale well by just building your app right in the first place.
Right.
I thought that was clever. What are the two most important decisions you made when you were in those stages, those early making decisions about how to build the app that helped you to scale well?
Right. One of the decisions we made 6 years ago was to run our own infrastructure. So we buy our own servers, we run our own network switches, all that sort of thing. When I talk to someone who's just getting started, I tell them 95% of all businesses, you shouldn't do what we're doing. You should use Amazon or Rackspace or Google or something like that. You should make those early problems of setting up equipment be someone else's problem. But that's, for us, there's just certain characteristics of our application that made that impractical. Basically, the cloud services are fantastic for reducing your early costs and for helping you if your application is fundamentally very spiky. Like if you're running a video streaming service and you need to be able to make the new Justin Bieber video go out live for a whole bunch of people in the world, you need to be able to scale your networking all of a sudden really quickly. For Evernote, we worked really hard to smooth our application out so that our application synchronizes in the background. It's not based on the exact time you're using it and things like that, so that we don't have a lot of bandwidth spikes or CPU spikes or storage spikes. It's not as friendly for a cloud service. So that was a pretty big decision for us, and I think that there are a few applications that have that characteristic. If there's a few things that you might do that you should start out and run your own hardware. But for most folks, you shouldn't.
Now let me ask about that. How painful is it, in the era of everything, anything as a service, to transition from web hosting services to your own? Is that as bad as everybody makes it seem?
A lot of that sort of depends on how much data you're storing. If you basically have hardly any data, then I think the transition's pretty smooth. If you have a lot of stuff, it's a lot harder because you have to take that stuff out while the plane is flying through the air and actually get it into a different plane, which is fairly difficult. There have been companies who have done that transition, even at a fairly large scale. Zynga, a short walk away from here, they did that. They got out of, at least they're, half and half, let's say, out of a cloud provider and into their own infrastructure. But when you have to make that transition, if you have to make that transition, it's fairly difficult, but mostly based on how much data you have to move.
Okay. And another thing, an early decision that you said earlier that you guys had made was about picking platforms and where to go native and where just to focus on the web.
Right. For us, we've developed probably 30 pieces of software that run on some application or another. So in the Chrome web browser, on Mac, on Windows Phone 7. So we've developed for a lot of different platforms, so we've got a pretty broad experience there. And what we've decided and found the hard way, and this isn't too novel, I know some other companies have talked about this, is that you really have to hire the people who are the best programmers for each platform and do the best native application you can for that platform. There's everybody's always hoped that there'll be some lowest common denominator that you can write for, whether it's old IDEs that would build multi-platform applications or whether it's HTML5. For most actual applications that people are going to be interacting with on a long-term basis, you need to build the best app for that platform because otherwise you are going to be the 10th best application in your category. Being the 10th best Android application in a category, you might as well not have even bothered building it. You either try to be the best, you try to build the best app for that platform with engineers who know the usability requirements of that platform, or you just don't bother, is our philosophy. So in a few cases, that means we just don't bother.
Now, I know the mobile web has problems with scale and performance right now. Do you think the mobile web, how many years, let's just put this hypothetically, how many years do you think it will take for the mobile web to become scalable so that you can instantly have, a multi-platform, platform-agnostic mobile app that works?
I think that there are certain things that mobile web is fantastic for. Like if you basically have an informational website that someone's going to visit a couple times, you know, the MobileBeat website, which I was looking at on my phone on the walk over here, you know, that's fantastic because it doesn't make sense to download an application to find out about an event. But when you're going to be interacting with something day in and day out, like we have people who use Evernote 30 times over the course of a week, 30 different sessions with our application. And at that point, it's just really, really hard to beat the usability of an application that is developed and tuned to the millimeter for that particular platform. And I think platform agnostic HTML5, I think it will get to the point of being good enough for 70% of applications pretty quickly. But that last 30%, like you're never going to get the very, very best performance out of anything that doesn't take into account all of the nuances of that platform.
That makes me so sad.
Sorry.
It contradicts my fondest dreams. But you know, I guess we can lay some money on it backstage later and see who's right in 5 years.
Okay.
I hope it's me. Okay, so let's open it up to the rest of our panel. At what point did you guys experience scaling issues? Ed, do you want to go first, Edward?
Sure, yes. So, you know, I work at Pivotal Labs, which is a consultancy, and we do roughly 100 different client engagements a year. About a third of them involve native mobile. And by the way, I'd echo what you said right off the bat about native apps. Many of our clients come to us hoping they can get away with building something generic that will work across different devices or compile down to iOS or Android. And some of them have even started doing that and then come to us. And almost every time I see them switch to native. So I think, you know, looking across the portfolio we have in a given year, really the scaling challenges, they're as broad as software development is broad, because in large part scaling mobile apps, what you mean by that at the end of the day tends to be the server-side component of the software development effort. You can certainly, you know, get yourself in trouble with the client-side app, but in large part talking about the API and what's behind it. You know, so if the question is, you know, which of the clients we come across has the most success, or what do we encourage them to do to have the most success right off the bat? You know, actually, I'd say, if I had to pick one thing, the most important thing to do early, which was one of your earlier questions, the most successful of our clients really internalize the notion that those developers who are working on the native app are on the same team as those working on the API side, right? It's very easy to think of a very solid separation, a very bright line there, and technology-wise and protocol-wise there is. But you know, to the extent that those teams are separated in terms of space or in terms of time, you know, one is built before the other, those are the teams that have problems. Those that think of it as one unified effort, people cross between the teams, the product manager is talking to both sides, those are the ones that have the most success, we find.
Okay. And Tom, let me ask you, at what point did Pandora experience its first growing pains? What were the challenges that you guys came up against?
You know, we've been really fortunate. Our architecture looks a lot like Dave's. We own and operate all of our infrastructure. We buy all our bandwidth. We stream all our bits, and that's always been the case.
Okay. Well, Pandora was an idea before anything as a service.
That's true. In 2004, we didn't have nearly the range of options, although we certainly could have put all of our music onto a CDN, for example, which would have made the scaling of the distribution of the streams much easier for this tiny company in Oakland. And it would have been cheaper, too. But we made the call to do it ourselves because it seemed like in the success scenario, such a big part of the value proposition was about reliably and accurately delivering those bits just in time for every listener on every platform. And it felt weird to me to build a business where you know, as a company, we didn't have any experience with like such a core part of the value proposition. So we did the harder thing and, you know, racked up our own servers and bought our own bandwidth, and we did lots of comical, embarrassing things along the way. The original version of the service was running off of a Linksys router like the one you have in your den at home. And when we finally swapped it out for some kind of even unmanaged but at least rack mountable switch, we turned it over and someone had written on a piece of tape on the back of it, Do not use in production. This router, only 99% reliable. So we ran for a few months like that. When we finally crossed the 100 megabit threshold, which seemed like a lot, we had to get our first gigabit drop. And I remember being on the phone with the guys at the data center, and they said, okay, a week from today or whatever, we can have the fiber optics dropped into your rack for the gigabit connection. And I nodded my head and looked at my 22-year-old history major sysad sitting across the table from me, and hung up the phone. And I was like, do you have any idea what to do with fiber at all? And he's like, nope. And I'm like, you should go to Fry's and figure that out. So there must be some kind of what's it that you plug in. So we figured out a lot as we went. But the good news is we, although I do remember sitting kind of white-knuckled, watching the bandwidth climb towards 100 megabit, knowing that the link was going to die. And I just didn't even know what the failure scenario would look like if we saturated that. Unfortunately, we never got there before the gigabit link came in, but it was really close. There's really only one moment in the company's history where we hit a scaling point that was kind of really scary, and that was we launched the service as a subscription service. So it was free for 10 hours of listening, and then at the end of 10 hours, we'd ask you to give us a credit card and subscribe for $36 a year. And that was all going very well. In fact, it was going better than we had hoped, in the sense that the top of the funnel was really full. We had tons and tons and tons of people that were interested in trying the service, probably 10 times more than we had planned for. Fortunately, the servers were holding up, but when you go through this conversion funnel to subscription, like what drips out the other side is a tiny little number. And it was actually, people were converting to subscription at the pace that we expected, but we knew we eventually were going to be an ad-supported service, and it felt really, really like, saying goodbye to 95% of your users when you get 1,000 a week is one thing. Saying goodbye to 95% of your users when you get 10,000 a week or 100,000 a week is another thing entirely. So we did this mad dash to move from a subscription service to an ad-supported free service. And I remember we had some new investors. We went into a board meeting, and I described this plan where we were going to make the transition from ad-supported to free. And I said it was going to take us 6 weeks to write the software that was required. And they said, you already have like a free trial. You should take a nanosecond. Just go back to the office and do it. So I somewhat foolishly, they talked me into it. And so we went back and did like the 3-day version of the 6 weeks of work that we had planned. And I made the announcement that Pandora is now free. And that, I have to tell you, the difference between your service is free for 10 hours, tell your friends, and your service is completely free to tell your friends, like that was another 10x of growth overnight. And we weren't ready for it, and